All right, now it's time to learn about how your body maintains a good blood sugar or blood glucose. So picture this as being and when everything is balanced. This is your normal blood sugar, which tends to run somewhere between 70 to 100, depending on which organization you're referring to. When your blood sugar is here in this normal level, everything's running good. Your body's getting glucose where it needs to go. You feel good. When it begins to drop down, things begin to happen that's not so good. If it goes up too high, again, not good. But your body has a natural process to be able to respond to this. And that's, of course, implying that our pancreas is working well. You'll see that our pancreas is the organ that's going to help regulate it if things start to drop down or uh, uh, have a high spike. So let's look at the first thing is when things begin to go up. Oops, let's say your blood sugar begins to go up. You just had some food, maybe you had dessert, and so you've got extra blood glucose in here. Well, that begins to go up, and if it goes up too high, that could end up causing some severe issues. And then what our body does is it uses the pancreatic beta cells located in the pancreas, and it secretes a hormone called insulin. Insulin is going to help those blood sugars that's piling up in your blood to get into cells where it's safe, it's stored. And so that is very essential is to have that insulin in order to do so. Insulin allows things to go into the cells. So that can kind of help. It also promotes glycogenesis. Glyco being glycogen and the creation, so the creation of glycogen. So once we have our body that has made its fulfilled its needs within the cells, anything that's left over, we're going to put into our liver and make glycogen. That's that glycogenesis. We'll store as much as we can here. When that bank gets full, anything that's left over, we're probably going to turn it into a triglyceride and store it as fat. All right, now that's with eating and your blood sugar going up high. On the other hand, when let's say our body is using all of this and these begin to run out, our blood sugar begins to plummet. And that can be dangerous, just the same as a high blood sugar. What does your body do? It also, within the pancreas, is going to send out the opposite hormone, which is called glucagon. Glucagon is going to signal your liver to take that glycogen that you built up with the help of insulin, and it's going to break it apart and release it back into the blood to pull those blood sugars back up to where it's safe, right? This is all coming from, or the glucagon is being secreted from the pancreatic alpha cells. This is your beta here cells. Another thing is that it will stimulate glycogenolysis. So that's a term. I told you there's going to be some terms that sound very similar to one another. So that is the technical term of saying your body's breaking down the glycogen, splitting the glycogen to be released into glucose and to go into your blood. And then it will also, if necessary, it will stimulate gluconeogenesis. You've heard this term already, but the creation of new glucose. And that is from non-carbohydrate sources. I gave you an example, like our amino acids. If we have to, with that structure, we'll go in there and we will break it down. It kind of looks like carbon. You got a nitrogen on, you got an R group. You have a hydrogen. And so it will take bits and pieces of this and strip it apart, and it will create some glucose just the same. Okay, it's a limited supply of what we can do, but we can. We don't want to because once you break down a muscle, it's no longer going to be able to function as a muscle. We've stripped that amino acid, that protein is no longer that protein. So that's why adequate carbohydrates will help to prevent having to break down protein. It's protein sparing. A few more hormones that affect your blood glucose or blood sugars. We have epinephrine, norepinephrine, and also cortisol. So epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're known as the fight or flight hormones. You probably have experienced this. If you ever had something that kind of shocks you, this is probably sad for me, but I tend to have a heavy foot. And so I tend to speed, and lo and behold, there's a cop. And when I see that, it makes kind of like a flash feeling throughout my body. I kind of get this little shock or scaredness from it. Well, that's actually from these hormones. These hormones rise up really quickly, which stimulates glycogenolysis, so splitting of glycogen. It's releasing glucose into my system. So glucose, and if necessary, gluconeogenesis. Again, stripping down things like amino acids to also make glucose. And I need this glucose if I need to fight, or more likely what I would do, flight. The next one is cortisol. Cortisol also increases blood glucose, and it does so, or it's kind of known as the stress hormone. And the way it does so is through also gluconeogenesis pathway. So same thing, we are going to create more glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. And this is a common reason why many patients in a hospital have higher than normal blood glucose, because it's from stress. It causes your blood sugars to go up. Again, this is just your body's protection. When you feel stressed, your body thinks something's bad about to happen. I might need energy in order to do something to save my life, and so that's what happens. This is produced by the adrenal glands, and those are the kind of little T-shaped looking glands that are on top of your kidneys. That's a horrible kidney, and I'm sorry. Speaking speaking of diabetes, there are quite a large amount of people who have been diagnosed or undiagnosed walking around. And 84 million people out there have what's known as prediabetes. Sometimes you might hear that referred to as borderline diabetes, but preferably it's called prediabetes, meaning you're going in that direction, you don't quite need medication to treat it. So, out of 30 million Americans that do, in fact, have high enough blood sugars to be classified or diagnosed as having diabetes, 7.2 million are walking around there undiagnosed, which is very scary, can cause a lot of harm to your body. It also costs us in healthcare expenses a lot of money every year. Not only that, but also missed work and hospitalizations. All right, you do not need to memorize those stats, but it is something to be aware of. So, what are some symptoms of diabetes? Here's some fancy way of saying things. Polydipsia, that's uncontrolled thirst. Polyuria, excessive urination. And polyphagia, a strong desire to eat, being very, very hungry. So why is all of this happening? When your blood sugar starts to get really rich in when your blood becomes very rich in blood glucose, your body wants to lower that. In order to do so, it's going to try to bring in more water. It's going to say, hey, trigger the thirst hormone, reach out for water because I need to dilute this. I need to bring in some more water because this concentration is way too high, this percentage here. So let's bring it down. So it's going to tell your body to seek out fluids. And if you drink a lot of fluids, of course, excessive urination is going to happen. Plus, your body is telling yourself to get rid of whatever is going wrong in your blood. So it's going to trigger you to urinate more. Another thing is you'll have a strong desire to eat. And this is kind of strange, but you have a ton of glucose here. You have energy right in your blood, but you don't have a way to get it into your cells because you have diabetes and you are missing insulin, which is the key. That's a sideways I, and that's supposed to be an insulin. You're missing insulin, which would get this blood sugar into the cells to produce energy. That's my version of a lightning bolt for energy. All right, so without that, you can have all of the sugar in your blood you can eat, but it's not going to do you any good unless it can actually access the cells. Let's talk about a few different types of diabetes. The first one being type 1 diabetes has different names. We used to call it juvenile diabetes because the onset typically will happen before the age of 30. It is an autoimmune disease, meaning that your body is attacking all of these beta cells that would be producing insulin, that key that we need in order to get the blood sugars from the blood into cells to do their job. Now they can't do that. It's a smaller subset of patients that have type 1 diabetes. Usually not as common, again, to treat these patients. Um, Early on, so pediatrics usually is when it occurs, and again, absolute destruction of these cells. For life, these people will require exogenous or outside insulin sources. We have a lot of easier ways to get that into patients now with insulin pumps instead of having to actually give yourself an injection all the time. If diabetes goes untreated, whether it's type 1 or type 2, again, your blood sugar goes up really high and it can lead to something known as diabetic ketoacidosis. Keto, and that's because your body, since it can't use the glucose, it has to go to a backup energy production, and that is making those ketones. So ketones are very acidic. And with that acidity, it begins to change the pH of your body. And when that happens, things get destroyed. It destroys the proteins in your body, and your body is a huge source of proteins from the cell walls to the enzymes that you need. And so body processes will halt and end up in a seizure, coma, and eventually death if not treated. This diabetic ketoacidosis, also known as DKA, is much different from ketosis that is diet induced by someone who does not have diabetes. Ketosis is part of that ketogenic diet that people will try to go on, meaning they're eating a lot of high fat foods and very low carbs. However, their pancreas still works, and so they're still able to produce enough glucose to keep them out of this ketoacidosis. They still are developing these ketones, but not to the point where it changes the pH of their bodies. Moving on to type 2 diabetes. This used to be called adult onset diabetes. We can't call it that anymore because now we are seeing younger and younger patients develop this. This is a good diagram of what I was referring to as insulin is that key that you need in order to get the blood glucose from your blood into the cell in order to produce things like ATP and to nourish the cells. So without this door won't open here, and this blood glucose stays within the blood, and then that's what causes all those symptoms like we were talking about earlier. I know this is a higher population, or the majority of cases, type 2 diabetes. This tends to start as prediabetes and gradually eventually occurs into full-blown type 2 diabetes. This case is not complete destruction of your pancreatic cells. They still work. You just seem to be resistant to your insulin. It's like having a key that just doesn't work. I've had some keys that are poorly made, and if you're not using it just right, it won't turn that lock over. That's kind of similar to this. You still have insulin, you still have the keys there, it's just not working as efficiently. And so blood sugars tend to kind of bounce back up, go back in, they're not working. Right? This can be treated by diet and lifestyle changes like exercise and watching the amount of carbs that you eat. But most of the time, it's also treated with medication as well. However, this type of diabetes can be treated with some types of oral prescription drugs to help lower it. You will never see this being, well, I can't say never, but this is not going to be used for type 1 diabetes. Also, if it's not controlled well enough with oral medications, then that person may have to be also put on insulin as well. And the last type of diabetes I'm going to discuss in this chapter is going to be gestational diabetes. This is a diabetes that's specific to pregnancy. Usually, mom has never had diabetes before in her life, and then all of a sudden, in the late stage of her first or second trimester, she develops diabetes. Same kind of symptoms that you would experience in other cases of it. With this, once the baby is delivered, it does tend to resolve. Unfortunately, they will be at an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes sometime later in their life. What is bad? What are some of the harmful effects? Well, for mom, a couple of things is that glucose that is super high in mom's blood is going to be delivered to the baby. So that's extra. Just think about it as the placenta, if we have a placenta out here. Think about the umbilical cord being a sugar straw. And so all of that extra blood glucose that's piled up in mom's blood is going to baby, Now, it's not going to hurt baby because they have a pancreas that's working. It's going to keep their blood sugars under control. But what it is providing is extra calories. And so with extra calories comes a little chubby baby, and the baby gets so big that they end up usually having to have maybe a cesarean or a C-section, or can also cause other complications when the baby gets too big. This is usually the cases on the news. If you ever see like a 14-pound baby was born, they look about 3 months old and they're newborns, that's because probably mom had gestational diabetes and it either went undiagnosed or untreated. All right, that brings us to the end of the different types of diabetes. Make sure that you can distinguish the different differences between each one. Which one is autoimmune? Which one is more weight related? How are they treated? What's the percentage? Which one's more likely or more abundant in the population?